start again.
Yeah, no, mic's on.
Yes, we have to talk later. My meeting.
Call the meeting to order.
I'll talk to you later.
And the first item, please, Madam Clerk. Pardon?
Any other business items?
Any other business items? On open?
No.
No. Moving forward.
Okay. Our first item is a delegation from Mr. James Lotta of FortisBC, and he's here to provide an update on the Eagle Mountain Woodfibre gas pipeline project. Just ask him to come forward to the table.
Thank you. Mr. Lodo, you were here before to address this, I believe?
I was, yes. In fact, that's why I'm back, because last time I was here a couple months
Did
ago.
so well.
Thank you. Mayor and Council asked me to come back before we filed our environmental assessment certificate to give an update, and that's why I'm here.
Oh, and you're bringing us a lake and a paddle wheeler and a restaurant and everything to go with it?
Well, we'll see what we can do on that side.
Thank you.
So, good afternoon again. My name is James Lotta. I'm here with Gary Abbott from FortisBC. He's our project manager for the compressor stations, with Carol Greaves, our community relations manager, and Danielle Galanders. She's a project engineer with FortisBC as well.
Doing welcome.
As I just mentioned, I'm just here to give an update on where we're at with the project because you asked us to, and to answer any questions you might have. We are just about to file our environmental application with BC Environmental Assessment Office in mid-November, and so we thought we'd give an update. Just to refresh everyone's memory, so we're seeking approval to loop a portion of the Vancouver Island system, which starts in Coquitlam, to fuel a proposed liquid natural gas facility in Squamish. It's about a 47-kilometer pipeline, and there's a major crossing of the Squamish River in Squamish, 1.5-kilometer crossing of the Squamish River. The facilities we're building, in particular V1B, we're calling it, at the Eagle Mountain compressor station. So we're proposing to expand the existing compressor station, add two 20,000 horsepower electrically driven compressors, which will require about 30 megawatts to power. We're also building a new compressor station in Squamish, two 16,000 horsepower, also electrically driven compressors, and that will be right in the industrial park in Squamish. And then we're also upgrading our compressor station in Port Mellon with a relatively small 6,000 horsepower naturally gas-fired compressor. And then we're also building a meter station at the Woodfibre site, which is, again, just a really big gas meter for an industrial customer. Okay. And again, this is the map. This is the V1 Eagle Mountain compressor station in Coquitlam. Okay. The pipeline loop. Oh, sorry, and then that's the arrow up there is pointing to our V2 compressor station in Squamish. That's a brand new compressor station, and then we're upgrading our Port Mellon compressor station down there. Okay, the actual pipeline loop starts north of the Coquitlam watershed, so we're not building anything in the Coquitlam watershed. We're starting north of there, and then we're installing a 24-inch pipeline from that point all the way to Woodfibre. Okay. That's a schematic of what we're planning to build in Coquitlam at our compressor station there. So that pink area at the top, there's an existing compressor station there. We're planning to expand that footprint up, and then the blue box in the middle of the screen, we have to build an electrical substation to step down 69,000 volts to 25,000 volts from BC Hydro. And then those blue lines, that dark blue line going from that light blue box all the way up to that pink box up at the top, those are high voltage power lines to power the compressor station up at Eagle Mountain. Okay. So within the scope of this project is that light blue box in the middle, the power lines going up to that pink at the top, and the top half of that pink box is the scope of this project. Okay, and that's just a plot plan of the expansion. So that box at the top is the expansion, and everything under it is the existing compressor station now. Okay. Right now we are doing some investigative use testing. So we've completed what's called our geophysics testing up there, where you just put down some probes, take some measurements on the ground to see what kind of subsurface conditions you're expecting to build on. We're also planning to do some geotechnical testing, just a couple small boreholes to confirm the subsurface conditions, and we're just waiting for OGC permits for that, and then we'll be doing that in the next month, hopefully, if those permits come in. Our design for the compressor station will comply with all BCSA and OGC regulations, and there will be a BC, an APEC BC engineer of record assigned to sign off on all the design. Okay. Last time I was here, you asked to see some pictures of what it might look like, and all these have been included in our environmental assessment application as well. So that's what Eagle Mountain looks like now, before the project, and this is what it will, from our visual modeling anyway, what it'll look like after. So that you'll be able to see some buildings up there for the compressor station. Okay. The power lines, they're typical wood pole power lines that we're proposing to use, and from the viewpoint, that star shows the viewpoint. That star on the left there with that teal, I guess, pie that shows what you're looking at, or from where you're looking, and you can see from the before and after pictures the power lines will be pretty much indiscernible. You won't be able to see them before and after construction. Okay, and that's again looking at the power lines, but from a different viewpoint. Okay, you can see the boxes pointing to where the power lines are, and you can barely make them out, if at all. Okay. The next steps are, again, we're just on the eve of filing our environmental application. That's in the middle of this month. And as part of that, so after you file your environmental application, you go through a public consultation process, and that's what we're getting ramped up to do right now. So we're actually so we're going to hold a couple open houses, one in Coquitlam in the new year. We're opening a storefront in Squamish where people can come in and just ask any questions they might have about the project and talk to us directly. We also have a project website, and we're also hoping to hold some workshops for First Nations where they can, tell us what they're interested in on a commercial basis, and also ask us any questions they might have about the project on an environmental level or an economic level. Okay. After we file our environmental certificate, if all goes well, the legislated timelines will put us in approval, environmental certificate anyway, for June of next year. And we're also hoping to get our BC OGC permits, the Oil and Gas Commission permits, by that time as well. And then hopefully start construction this time next year on the pipeline and the facilities. Okay. And the agreement we have with Woodfibre, which is the company building the LNG facility, is that they would like us in service by November of 2016. Okay. And that's it.
Thank you. Mayor Stewart is in the room. I shall put the chair over to Mayor Stewart, and Councillor O'Neill wishes to speak.
Okay. Councillor O'Neill.
Yes, thank you very much, and thanks for coming here today. It's good to see all that update, and particularly good to present those visualizations. It gives us some security knowing that they'll fit in pretty well. It'll still be visible, but that's good. And I think our community certainly understands how important something like this is, and realizes that we're kind of at the utility services crossroads here in Coquitlam. There's a lot of things coming and going through us here because of the strategic place we have in the community, and understand that these sorts of things are inevitable. I recall that at the previous presentation that we had here, the idea was floated that as perhaps a goodwill gesture from Fortis, that there might be some project that they could undertake on a sort of good neighbor policy. And the particular project that was mentioned was a connection from the top of the very popular and increasingly popular Coquitlam Crunch Trail up to a park that we have in the top part of Westwood Plateau that's quite near where you guys will be working. The thought was you're going to have all the equipment in the area, you're going to have all that personnel in the area. How hard could it be to build us a little trail to connect the top of continue? Even today there are people walking on the Crunch Trail. Since we upgraded it with the staircase, 427 steps, was it, or 34 or something, in the steepest part, people are using that. It would be a really great gesture, I think, on Fortis's part to do something like that. Have you thought any more about that?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, we just met with your staff last week to talk exactly about that. So your staff provided the plans for the trail and the proposed configuration of what you'd like us to build. And that's actually what Danielle is going to help us out with. She's going to look at putting that proposal together. So absolutely, we put a lot of thought into it. We've been talking to your staff about it, and we are moving forward on the basis that we'd like to help you out with that.
Well, that's great news.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for confirming that. Appreciate that. That's all the questions I had. Thanks.
Okay.
Councilor Wilson. Thanks. I was going to ask the same thing, so thank you. The other question I had was the picture that you showed with the view of the buildings.
Yeah.
Is there anything that can be done to try to hide them? I don't know how much excavation needs to be done to, build the foundation and everything, but was there any talk about putting trees in front of there or anything like that to try to hide the?
I could probably answer that. Very limited.
Come to the table.
We can all hear you, but the microphone picks up your voice for the enormous studio.
Oh my.
So the limitations are the danger trees. We cannot have trees falling into these buildings. So the original station, your fire department asked us to increase the tree buffer zone to increase the buffer area. So this new facility is directly adjacent to the existing facility. So we have to remove the trees between the two facilities. So that's why you're seeing quite a visual impact compared to the original.
So you can't plant tall trees, but like cedar hedging or anything like that? Or if people are looking from the bottom, I mean, it doesn't have to be as tall as the buildings.
We could certainly entertain something to try and mitigate the visual impact for sure. Right now, we haven't done anything, but we certainly could look at that. Yes.
I mean, that'd be great, and I think everybody in our community would appreciate it.
Yeah.
It's nice looking at a nice green mountain rather than one that's dotted with buildings. So thank you. That'd be great.
For sure.
Just clarification, how tall is the tallest building?
I gotta say 35, 40 feet. The final design hasn't been, we're in the detailed design right now.
10 years of growth.
My question is about taxes. It was my question last time, and just if we could get some clarification this time. How much does does Fortis pay now in the city in annual basis on taxes, and how much will it be in the future when this expansion, or if this expansion happens, just so that our community can understand? I mean, obviously we do want to help the movement of LNG, but how are we going to benefit in taxes?
Sure. So I'm not sure how much we currently pay. Do you know how much we currently pay?
I used to be the operations manager for that facility, and I thought it was around $300,000 a year for that facility. Those are very round numbers. And how much they're going to go up posts?
So in the EA, we estimated, and in the EA application, you can read it, and it'll be publicly available. It's over about $170,000 a year is the increase in property tax we'll pay because of it. Additional, that's right.
Okay, you got that? Mr. Esteban, similar numbers?
We had looked at that when the question was asked before, and as an entire company, we believe that the total taxes remitted to Coquitlam are about $700,000. That's for all of their facilities, all through the whole community, and about half of that is related to pipeline revenues. We get a percentage of the revenues, I think it's that per house, and about half of it is based on assessments, based on each individual building. I'm not sure that taxes from this facility would go up as much as you're thinking, because my understanding is what we get from the gas revenues is what is consumed in Coquitlam more than what goes through Coquitlam, and none of this will be consumed in Coquitlam. That's why we're asking for something for the trail crunch and that kind of stuff. So I'd be surprised if taxes on those particular facilities would be $170,000, but you've done the calculations, not me. But hopefully that gives you some indication of the total, what the company gives back to Coquitlam.
That's great. And also, thank you for the clarification there about the fact that it's about consumption. This it's about consumption when they pay the taxes, and this is not for consumption, it's just for a pass-through. So that would lead me to another question was, is there any opportunity to increase capacity once this is done, or will it be at capacity as soon as it's finished?
It's pretty well at
At
capacity.
capacity.
When it's finished?
Yes.
Thank you.
Councilor Reid?
As someone who deals with street appeal in my community with businesses, you guys are like the guy in the neighborhood who has the big boat and puts a bright blue tarp over it. So may I suggest you could paint it forest green and browns, that it wouldn't stick out as much as it does now?
Absolutely.
I realize you can't plant roses and stuff hanging over it, but brown and greens would be,
Sure.
would at least hide it a bit. Thank you.
Living wall.
Camouflage, yes.
That's right. Less suspect.
Okay, anybody else? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, and change the wallpaper.
Plant stuff up the wall. If the roof green, I wonder why they had a blue roof instead of. Yes.
Because you're like the guy who lives in a big neighborhood and puts a bright blue tarp.
I know.
You could get a green tarp and it wouldn't look as bad. Cheap.
That's on the minutes.
Oh, sorry, we haven't done that yet.
Next item are minutes of the council and committee meeting held Monday, October 27th. The recommendation is to approve those minutes.
So moved. Second.
Favor, opposed, carried unanimously.
Moving on to reports of staff. First report is regarding Green Street's review, Watkins Avenue, Green Street. This was done as part of the Coquitlam Leadership Program. We have introductory comments by the General Manager of Planning and Development and a presentation by the Development Manager.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. It's my pleasure to provide some opening remarks regarding this report today, but it's a particular pleasure to introduce Michael Dhaliwal and his Green Streets project, which is part of the city's leadership development program. I think most of the council knows Michael. He's one of our young industrious planners in the development section of the department. Week in, week out, you'll see his reports coming forward. I guess that gets a little mundane at times, just dealing with OCPs and rezonings and DPs. He likes to have some other challenge as well, and this is a good match with our leadership program, where it gives some of the staff that are working in areas, I think it's a little bit routine to step out and do something more of a research, a sole project basis, and so that's kind of the background on the Green Street project, sort of fitting in with the leadership program. Just very briefly, because this predates Michael's time here, in fact it predates many of the council's time here, about Green Streets. May was here with me. But just very briefly on some of the background, it was one of the elements of the neo-traditional town planning, neighborhood design that had been foreseen for Northeast Coquitlam. And it was one of the elements we tried as a trial basis at the time. And to be honest, there was some hesitation. There were some doubters about the project. We were fortunate. We were dealing with Westbuild on a particular piece of property where there was a watercourse relocation. There were some options to do something a little different there. And Westbuild was open to that. So I think they should be recognized in this project as well. At the time, council supporters undertaking the project on a trial basis, and we made a commitment we would check into it, monitor it over time, and report back. So here we are, a number of years later, reporting back on it. As well, in recent years, it's been my sense that council has become more aware and maybe a little more receptive to the Green Street concept. I think the Watkins Street has been quite popular. Councillor Hodgins lives nearby and has kept an eye on things there. I know there's been applications, development applications that come forward recently where council has asked about the potential for that. So again, we said we would look into it, and it's a good opportunity to combine that with the reporting back and with the leadership project. So we're pleased to be coming before you today. Michael will go into his presentation. There was a bit of a process he went through, and there is some conclusions that are drawn. And essentially where we're landing is that if council supports further pursuing green streets, and we feel there's some merit in doing that in the appropriate location with the appropriate design elements, if council supports us doing that, what we would propose is to add that to our 2015 work program, look into it further, come back with some locational and design guidelines that we would bring back to council to enable these in the future. So with that, let me turn it over to Michael. He has a PowerPoint presentation. He assures me it's going to be smooth and efficient. So if you wouldn't mind, let him go through the presentation, and we'd be happy to take your questions and comments after.
Hi everyone, this is a brief presentation on the Green Streets project. What this presentation will do is touch on the project's objectives, provide details on the characteristics of the successes or weaknesses of the Watkins Avenue Green Street, briefly discuss the feedback we received from public consultation, developer consultation, and internal staff consultation, and provide a few conclusions. So the objective of the project was to determine if the pilot Green Street was a success or not, determine what the strengths and weaknesses of Watkins Avenue Green Street were, and identify any considerations we should take into account if we do proceed with creating more green streets in Coquitlam. The Watkins Avenue Green Street was approved in 2006 as part of a rezoning, OCP amendment, and subdivision, which created 40 RS7 lots and 40 RTM1 townhouses on the perimeter of the site. 20 RS7 lots face the Green Street directly. The Green Street is 20 meters wide, 70 meters long, and the lanes north and south of the Green Street behind the Green Street homes was widened into a primary access standard, which is standard lane is generally 6 meters in a right-of-way with a 3.7 meter pavement width, and curb to curb that goes up to 4.5 meters. And what we did in the Watkins Avenue situation is it was expanded to 10 meter right-of-way, which provided the larger garage letdowns, and has a 6 meter pavement width and 6.6 meters curb to curb. This is just some general pictures of the street. This is looking from, if you were walking from Coast Meridian in, this would be the entrance into the Watkins Avenue on the east side. The famous frog, or the western entrance, is a little bit different than the east side, where it's more open as you're coming into the green space. This is a direct shot looking at the green space. So the lawn was planted where you would normally have the asphalt planted for the street, and Watkins Avenue is the programming was limited just in case it didn't turn out to be a success. You could always rip out the lawn and pave the road, so that was always an option available. So that's why you don't see any play equipment or other programming in the space. So as part of the project, we consulted and we stuck with the 100 meter consultation radius, which is consistent with other public consultation mailouts. We had 98 households were sent questionnaires. The response rate was 29%. We received 28 comment forms. 13 were from the residents that live on the Green Street, so just about half, 46%. And 75% of the respondents are in households with children. Some general findings was 60% of the residents that don't currently live on the Green Street would purchase a home on the Green Street. 92% of the residents that do have homes on the Green Street would do it again. 89% say they use the Green Street on a regular basis. 89% use the Green Street and 79% use it on a regular basis. 80% of the respondents said they were able to find their visitors were able to find parking easily, and 82% of the respondents own 2 cars or less. Generally, adults have been using the space to socialize, meet, and interact with the neighbors, hold barbecues, picnics, play bocce ball or badminton, and throw children's parties and holiday events. Children have been using the space for outdoor play, imaginative play. They create the frog as a monster or a hero, and then they've been using like the trees as like they're in a forest. This is some of the responses we've got from residents. Overall, it's been a safe, comfortable, and connecting place, and a lot of the residents felt they wouldn't have known their neighbors without being connected to the green street. We also did a developer consultation. We were sent out letters to UDI, the Greater Vancouver Home Builders, and developers that are doing large multifamily or large subdivisions in Coquitlam. UDI, Morningstar, and Westbuild responded. UDI just wanted to be kept appraised of any future decisions on the green streets if we do develop design guidelines or move forward with requiring with certain types of developments. They would like to provide input at that time. Westbuild and Morningstar generally said that the green streets have a lot of great social benefits, but in Westbuild's case, they prefer that it be a developer's decision and not the city's requirement. So in certain developments, if it does seem like it's a good fit, let the developer decide to include it. And Morningstar has built green streets in other municipalities as well, and felt there's some concern sometimes if it's not in a community and they can't point to it. So they were looking for some sort of relaxation or incentive and density increase for building green streets. With consultation with staff, Parks had indicated that there should be more broader connection with the neighborhood. Sometimes these parks seem like they're private. If there's maybe looking at the design, if it wasn't linear in nature, or avoiding the barriers like the trellis feature on the east side, if it was more open, it might seem less private. Another question that came up with Parks, Transportation, and Fire Response was officially naming the space as maybe a park. Right now it's referred to as Watkins Avenue. All the homes are addressed off Watkins Avenue, and this leads to challenges for deliveries, fire response, referring it to as a park. And then Transportation was saying, ensure that any future green street has enough parking, that the lights are pedestrian oriented. Because we made it on a street standard originally, all the lights are based for the automobile and not for pedestrian use right currently. And develop in areas where there's no dead ends. So there's other options. If we're closing down a portion of the street, make sure there's good permeability in the road network. Development Servicing indicated that they needed a utility corridor for their utility trucks. Right now it's sometimes difficult getting equipment onto the green street because they have to park on either end and walk in to do some of the repairs. And manage the length of the linear green street. So some of the homes on this street had to be sprinklered because they are beyond the 45-meter distance from a fire hydrant. Sprinkling is not a requirement in the city of Coquitlam, so this is an issue for future green streets, the length, to manage the length of the street. And the green street had no impact on property values. A quick look at the tax assessment showed that if you're on the green street or not on the green street, your house is valued in the same way. Some considerations for the future of the program. Consider adjacent zoning. Make sure that the surrounding neighborhood has a zoning that's fit for the loss of parking that you might have in part of the green street. Review alternate design approaches. It does not have to be a street. You could have it homes fronting a park, maybe a green commons through a multi-family project. There are some other design considerations than just closing down a street. Consider requiring some development applications to consider green streets, and this would be part of creating locational design guidelines. Certain locations might be more favorable to creating green streets. Consider programming of the space, kids play area, some other types of recreational uses. Officially name the space so it's referred to as a park, not a street, and consider developing design guidelines. Three conclusions that were reached was based on the external and internal feedback received. It appears that Watkins Avenue was a successful park space and neighborhood amenity. A number of features that were incorporated as part of the Watkins Avenue Green Street were considered a success. The wider lanes, internally and from residents, it seemed the The wider lanes for maneuverability for parking was a success. We created a no secondary suites covenant on all the homes that were fronting the Green Street to avoid the creation of secondary suites and adding to the parking requirements. So this turned out to be a benefit in terms of not requiring more parking in the area. We also required all the homes to provide 3 parking spaces instead of the bylaw requirement of 2. And this is to compensate for the loss of parking that would happen as a result of Watkins Avenue being closed. The third conclusion is expanding the Green Street program may prove to be a successful development approach for the city of Coquitlam. And that concludes the presentation. Any questions?
Well, thank you very much. I've been looking forward to this report because this isn't that creative, but it certainly is creative in the Lower Mainland. It is unusual. Every planner studies Andres Duene's Seaside, Florida, or various other developments that go back 40 years with this kind of concept, and in fact, doing a case of Seaside, it's an 80-acre project where the whole thing is essentially based on Green Street's narrow pathways to get to the front door and access by vehicles to the rear. And there's lots in Canada. This one, I think, was a pretty simple one, and I think it's chosen to be simple largely so that it would be better accepted. I think there's lots of things that we can do to enhance it. You've identified some of them. I remember when Councillor Asmunsen and myself and others were out on site looking at, say, the parking at both ends, which I think we need to, it would do us well to give more thought to providing twice as much parking at both ends of the street to remove that one objection that we heard from some people that visitors had no place. If you had a wedding or if you were welcoming someone after the baptism, you were stuck with trying to, once your 3 spaces were gone, you had to go and take someone else's street spaces in an area that doesn't have it doesn't live on a green street, and therefore provides parking for all those people who get to live on a green street. We don't want that kind of resentment. So providing more parking, and in fact, perhaps even that dead end that butts into the trellis, for example, if you pushed it forward 6 inches, there's 3 or 4 perpendicular parking spaces that we'd have to work out how to back out of that into the lane space. But in the end, I really look forward to seeing us pursue more of these. I think curved would be nicer. I think perhaps even in the area, in the vicinity of commercial, so that you have a way to walk to the commercial facilities that isn't on a street, it's actually on a green street. You end up with perhaps using it more as a pedestrian corridor sometimes, and also the possibility that it doesn't have to be as wide as that we could allow green streets that are one-sided, that butt up against, say, water courses or natural areas, parks and such. Right? I think it was a great success. I'll tell you, when we go there for the annual Easter egg hunt, seeing 400 smiling children on one big front lawn is a really neat thing. You know, most council members have been there on those days. So, I'm speaking less than great project. Terry, I think I was supposed to. You know, Craig put it up before we got to the agenda. He was pretty adamant. Yeah.
Well, no.
You're next.
Well, thank you for the report. So this is something I've been asking for a couple of years now. So I'm glad to see that we got to this one. As Jim mentioned, I live in this neighborhood. In fact, I was part of the public, the neighbors that were consulted originally when this plan was brought forward during the planning for Upper Hyde Creek. There were actually 3 streets at that time that were planned, and then at the end it was decided to do this one just as a pilot. And talking to people who live on that street and to the neighbors, it has been a success, and I think the surveys back that up when we say 89% of the respondents said we should do more. It was interesting that 60% of the people who live in the area said they wish they lived on the green street. I noticed in the report that it mentioned that when they were originally sold that the prices were reduced, but that was actually, I think, the entire neighborhood, because when this Upper Hyde Creek came on board, there was a bit of a downturn in the market. I was going to ask how the current resale was, but you covered that. My experience is, though, that when a house goes up for sale there, it doesn't stay up for sale long, that the turnover is very quickly. It's very popular for people to live there. I think that there's certainly some successes there. The ability for having a place to gather. The mayor referenced the Easter egg hunt. It was fabulous being up there a couple of nights ago for Halloween and just seeing the kids out there in the Green Street. So it really has been a place for the community to gather, not just the residents, but the community as a whole. And in many respects, it almost replaces the need for us to do pocket parks. For a while, we were doing some really tiny parks, and my preference is to create these common green spaces, and that negates the need to do sort of these sort of, one lot size parks throughout the neighborhood. I prefer that land to be consolidated for bigger parks. So this creates that sort of mini green spaces throughout a neighborhood. And of course we know the environmental advantages of more permeable soil, the seepage from rainwater into the ground as opposed to that rapid surface rush off that we try to avoid when we're building up on the mountain. So there were some real benefits to the design for the community gathering up on the mountain. I made a couple of notes. I wasn't aware that we did the sprinklers. I thought that was why we did the wider lanes, was so that we had fire access from the back. So I thought that was sort of the original idea, was that we made wider lanes because that's where the emergency trucks were going to come in. So I was surprised to learn about that part of it. That was something that, as one of the residents at the time, was not discussed with us. Family-oriented space we covered. Parking. Interesting, this area is actually one of the worst areas for parking because right next to it is a townhouse complex that was built with single-car garages, no pads, and Marguerite at that point it was the old design where we only had parking on one side of the road instead of parking on both sides. So it's right next to an area that we get a lot of complaints about. But interestingly, I don't hear complaints from the people on the Green Street. So I think it's more of a case of location. Had the condos next door provided adequate parking, and had Marguerite been built to what we're now doing, we probably wouldn't have a parking issue in that neighborhood. So I don't think the parking is a result of problems that are a result of the Green Street, but more of just what happened next door. Having said that, the mayor quickly identified that at the end of the Green Street, it would be nice if we'd left 3 perpendicular parking spaces, so people could pull in. I think the parking at the back is good. We set the garages in, so there's, I think, pad parking in some cases. So I think we solved the parking in terms of compensating for the lack of street parking. I think it was more than compensated on the lot. In fact, I would argue, and probably better compensated for than some of the developments we currently do up on Burke. But the visitor parking at the ends would be nice, and even if that were then marked, 2-hour parking or 3-hour parking, so it doesn't become residential overflow parking. But I think parking, from what I've heard, was not an issue up there, nor was the resale on the homes. I think they were good. I do wonder what we can do to encourage this with the developers. I recognize that developers don't want to be burdened with extra costs, although I think in many cases the residents would pay for the privilege of living on the Green Street, whether it meant we had to continue with doing sprinklers, and I think there's a benefit to having sprinklers anyway. So, but I would look at the sort of see how we could encourage it, whether it is a little more density to offset by the green space in front, because I think there's some things that we can do to do it. I'd like to hear what you have to say about that.
Thank you, and through the chair, some good feedback. Let me just offer a few comments on that, and then Michael might want to weigh in as well. As I said, in this case, it was part of the give and take of a development application and the relocation of a watercourse, and so there was some pros and cons to it. We did hear through the consultation process, and Michael had reviewed this with me. He didn't get in depth in the presentation, but one of the developers consulted was actually looking for incentives. What are benefits? Relaxation of DCCs, or give us a break on the fees, or something like that. We took that away, and we looked at it both in planning and talked with other staff, particularly Raul and Parks, Rec, and Culture. And we're not so sure there's a need to have financial incentives, but certainly something we could look at if Council supports us preparing guidelines. We can look further. Because there are some cost savings going this route as opposed to building a full-fledged curb-to-curb street as opposed to laying down turf. But we think in those more unique situations, I think we had a couple of those come up recently east of Coast Meridian, where we were trying to create some dead-end road ends. There's a water course through there. There may be site-specific circumstances that lend themselves to it, so it may be advantageous for the developer to go with this sort of approach. At the same time, it could be a feature we could achieve. So, I don't know, Michael, anything on that you want to add?
I think you touched on the key points. They do have savings because you're not building a standard road, and we did narrow the actual curb portion is only 13 meters here, so they do get some savings that way too. And again, as Jim's saying, there could be certain locations that lend themselves to green streets, and possibly through neighborhood planning or identifying creating key locational design guidelines, those would direct developers on which sites would be perfect for
I would think on
street.
sheer saleability, I think marketability, when we see the results of the survey results, that would tell me right there that these should be easy homes to sell. I think the history from what I've seen bears that out. The other thing that from our standpoint, certainly having water, the permeability of the street instead of having street maintenance, snow removal. I recall as a resident at the time when this discussion came up, there was the question of who was going to maintain the green street. Was there cost savings, or was it going to cost more? And I don't know if that was costed out, the cost of cutting grass versus snow removal and curb patching and all the other things, that maybe that in fact I think that was alluded to here, that the green streets are actually cheaper to maintain in the long run for the city, or is that about a break even?
For traffic operations, it's a lot cheaper to maintain a green street than it would be a traditional road. Parks, Recs, and Culture said that, yeah, they do have to go up and mow it, but the cost is not significant that it impacts their budget overall.
And if we have one less pocket park in the neighborhood, we've covered it off. So, okay, good. That's it. Great. Thank you.
Now it's thank you, sorry for that. And lots of good comments from Councillor Hodge and observations about the popularity of these. I was walking on Watkins 3 weeks ago, and the 4 or 5 people who were home, when I knocked on their doors, there was unanimity about the popularity of living there. And obviously that is reflected in the survey that you did. The people love living there, and I've always been a fan of this since when I first discovered it. Really nice. Now, but, and there were lots of good ideas in here about how we can make them better, and the parking issues, et cetera, are very good. However, it seems to me that some of the ideas for changes that especially come from engineering and public works or from planning would actually change the nature of these green streets in a way that I think might decrease the popularity. And that's the idea that you want to open these up more, make them more parks, put playground equipment or more stuff in there to draw more people from actually, they would have the effect, I think, of drawing people from outside of that area into that green space. And I think at that stage, the people whose front lawn that essentially is would say, well, wait a minute, we're getting all these strangers right in our front lawn, and it's one thing to have a community of 30 houses or something where you get to know people, and you build that sense of community. But then if you've got extra parking each end, playground equipment in the middle, the name of a park and everything, it becomes a park, and it doesn't become that unique community building, community binding facility. And that's where I wrote, whoa, wait a minute, what about the consequences of that? All through this report, that's the area that I've got problems with. So I think we would kind of be, in our attempt to kind of make this a little better, we might be actually having the unanticipated consequence of deleteriously affecting one of the things that make these parks so popular. They are inward looking. This is the front lawn, a shared front lawn of a small community. And if you damage that in some way, it's going to be quite different. And I think you're going to have a negative response from the people who are who are enjoying that because it'll be quite different. So that's where I think you could be getting into trouble there. So that part of the Green Street that builds the communities, brings that community closer together, gets people out in their front doors playing with each other. Don't wreck that. That part ain't broke, so don't fix it. And I think you were trying to fix it somehow when it's not broken. So I would say back off on that. Be very, very careful. Any response?
Those are all fair comments. I think as part of looking at design guidelines, we can look at options. I don't think we want to keep all the successes of this design in place, but considering other options for future green streets that are maybe not as linear in nature.
Well, they can be curved and things like that. But to open them up, to add more parking, to put equipment, as I think that was suggested somewhere in here, makes that tot lots and things. That makes that into a different thing altogether, and it doesn't make it into the sort of green street that the people there love. It's going to be something different that will alter its character in a significant way.
Maybe if I could just to add to that. Really good observations. And I guess in many things in urban design there's a balance, and what may be appropriate in one location or one setting may not work so well in another. And this is the sort of thing I'd like to get into when we do the design guidelines. It wouldn't show sort of a one-size-fits-all sort of cookie-cutter solution. I think you need to think about, given the setting, given the size, and what the design parameters would be. But there is some rationale for thinking about an openness. Utilities, as Michael mentioned, need to get access in there with some of the equipment. So that calls for a little more openness at the ends. I think this might be a bit of a security thing too. You don't want to have green enclosures where, if the RCMP are on patrol and they can't see what's going on down the street, you want to have some visibility. Part of the feedback, and Michael can speak to this when he went around and spoke with staff and other departments from Parks and Rec, because they're public parks, and it's not a space it's not private outdoor amenity space that's being maintained by the city. So, but we heard that comment back, and I think some of the negative feedback from the residents was they felt like people were looking in their front windows. So they see it as the extension of their front lawn, even though there's a sidewalk that delineates that divide between private and public property. So
I think there is that balance there right now, that it is public. People can go there, and I'm sure with the big Easter egg hunt and stuff like that, people from around the neighborhood go there. And at any time you can go there and walk along that sidewalk and set up a picnic table if you wanted to, or a lawn chair. And you can do that. But it's finding the right balance there. And, putting a name on the park and extra parking and removing all the barriers at each end and putting playground equipment on top, that stuff, I think that's tipping the balance too far the other way. It is a public space, but these people have given up something for that public space as well. I think that's important. There are private spaces that are sort of similar to that. I've been to housing co-ops and things where there are townhouses lined up, and they've got the beautiful central area. And even a couple of blocks away from the Green Street, there's a townhouse complex with a sort of pie-shaped a private area in there with a public sidewalk that runs through it. I forget the name of that complex, but it's that sort of pie-shaped area, and they own the lawn and maintain the lawn themselves. And that's the reason they moved in there. I've talked to those people. They love that, to have that. That's a private thing, though, with a public sidewalk. But I think we've got a good balance with what we have here now between providing an amenity for the people who live there, and they've given up something for that amenity, and having it public. But it's not a full-blown pocket park kind of a thing. So I see the acting general manager of Parks, Rec and Culture's ears have perked up here too, and he's got a planning background, and I don't know if he's got some thoughts about it, his experience here. But if he does, I'd like to hear those too.
Yes, and just accolades to Michael. I know it's an interesting project. There's a fine balance. I think Jim has probably put his finger on this. there are some design improvements that can be made to this model to retain its publicness, but also balance it with the private expectations of those owners that are adjacent to this. In some ways, it's somewhat like the delineation of common property in a strata versus limited common property, right? In some ways, there's an expectation of people that live there that they've got somewhat a private space, but the public in the surrounding area believe they've got use of that space. So there's that fine balance. It is an absolute mandatory element that we must find the right balance in each unique circumstance. Those that live on it have given something up, but by the same token, the city maintains that it was a public park. And we do believe, like Councillor Hodge has mentioned, that our ability to develop these will help us actually offset some localized park needs. So there's a publicness that is for everybody. So I do agree with the comments. Our focus, working with planning, hopefully we can do a few of these, is to find that balance, not just with the use of the public space and the private space versus the quasi-public space, but also things like parking and other elements that allow us to open that up somewhat, because we've had criticism that it's a private park. And also for maintenance, again, Jim has mentioned that our ability to get machinery in there, and there's a high level of expectation by those owners. We've got to maintain that more than any other park. So, in some ways, we have to think about who it serves and how it serves. All the comments are very good, very fair, and I'm certainly listening in terms of our future projects.
Thank you very much.
Okay, well, I won't make you repeat all that because some of my questions are going to be the same. I'll carry on with the one thing that Terry has been talking about. I think it's a huge mistake to turn these into parks. Absolutely massive mistakes to turn these into parks. First of all, it's time that little kids had just a place to go, and this has proved to you that they just want grass. They don't need a whole bunch of stuff. They just want grass. The parents want grass where they can go and sit and do whatever they do, and the fact that we maintain it is a bonus. When we first built these, and I think, Jim, you and I were in the car when we took a tour with Westfield, I think, to look at the green streets and that, we had a problem because some of the water was landing up on in the grass. Do you remember? It was sort of like almost your own pool, and that became a bit of a problem, I think, until we did a bit more development and changed that. So at first they weren't that much used and people didn't like them as much, and also there were a lot of complaints about the maintenance of them. So let's talk about addresses. This is not that difficult. I mean, it is for Canada Post. Everything's difficult for them. But in any event, if it's Watkins Street, it can be Watkins Lane for a mailing address. All you have to do is have a lane. Everyone knows it's Watkins Street. Just call it Watkins Lane. And we were talking years ago when Deb Day was here, we were talking about doing the grid system in Millardville where we could have houses at the back on those long, skinny lots. And it would be Alderson Street and then Alderson Lane. So you can do the same thing with these green streets. Just call them lanes, and then you take the confusion away. One of the things, as a mom with a whole bunch of little kids and lots of grocery bags, I do not like detached garages. I like the garages attached. So the fact that you're requiring additional parking works, because then you could attach your garage at the back and then just have a larger apron for visitor parking. The parking at each end, I'm going to just talk about Watkins now. At each end of Watkins, you want to put some parking in for neighbors, and I think that's fine. But I don't know that you want overnight parking there either, because what that's going to do is just getting people who don't have parking or have got full garages into just that becoming their permanent parking lot. So I think maybe we have to give some thoughts about who is going to be using that. Ensure it's designed to serve the broader neighborhood. Well, as has already been said, these people are probably going to have the only single-family, guaranteed single-family homes in a single-family neighborhood in all of Coquitlam, because everyone else can have a suite, and there's no such thing as a single-family home then. So they do give up something, and I agree with that. Marketing, it's a choice of anything. The house that I may choose to buy will not be the house that you choose to buy, so it's just everyone has taste. So on your additional off-street parking provided on each lot, I think having the garages attached is a good way. The maintenance of the street trees is consistent with other street boulevards in the city. Well, please don't say that, because our maintenance is just awful. The mowing of the lawn is not reported to be a significant cost. Well, you know what? I see this a lot from planning when you're coming up. Nothing's a significant cost, but when we get 25 of them, they become a significant cost and significant time. So I think we have to look at that. When you say linear, somewhere in here it talks about Watkins being linear. Linear works. The only other way I see on Burt Mountain with the terrain up there this working is if we had a cul-de-sac and you could do the round part of it as a round green thing in the end of the cul-de-sac and have the lane go around the back of the bulb. So that would work too. But we have to remember the terrain that we have up there, and some of it's really steep. So some of it will be fun because you could probably put a mini ski hill there that I could ski down that would be like 3 feet, you know, as long as my skis. And that would be kind of fun. The fire hydrants, I agree, that's something that the fire chief should be addressing. Green Commons, so Green Commons, I think they do that a lot in England, I believe. They have lots of little commons, and it works out great. I remember in the one movie that we saw.
Notting Hill.
Notting Hill, that's it too. And those are commons, and I think I like that idea. I think that's really quite neat. And so instead of calling them parks, which I totally disagree with, these are not parks. These are open spaces. Let's make our parks parks and our open spaces open spaces, and not confuse the two whatsoever. And in here where it says we should consider it a park and dedicate it, I don't flip and think so. You dedicate these, and 20 years from now we want to open them up as streets again because maybe we don't need the green streets. Not a good plan. You know what you'll be fighting to undedicate a park. So that is not a good plan. And I think I'm almost done. Aren't you glad? So I went down and sort of along the idea of what Terry's saying is close the space. I don't believe they should be closed. I believe it should be open so people could see what it is. And to require people to do it,
Yeah.
I would say no, but encourage is, of course, you know how much I like to do that. And encourage is easy to do, providing that you have the location that it could benefit everyone. And location in these, I think, is going to be the key. And so I would think where we have, like we've had with many of the lands, that they're too steep to do anything but cul-de-sac at the end, the east-west, a couple of round things would work. You know, call them whatever you want to call commons. And those would work. But I like these linear streets, and this is really pretty. And market-wise, you know, people are going to look at what they're getting just like they do with every other house, and they're either going to love this or they're going to hate it. So I don't think market-wise, as you said, that it is. It's just what you like. So thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Rasmussen?
Well, thank you. I'll support this going on to the work plan for next year. I think there's some details, and you point out a lot of them that need to be worked out. I think while we're looking at Watkins Street, and I had my concerns when this was on council and we debated this issue about some of the parking. We've had some issues. We built some side parking skirts along the side of the roads paralleling Watkins, and some of the people using it as their own private parking or no parking. So that was an area rather than the ends we tried to. And we've had some issues with people taking that up as the residents in that area, and we've had to do some issues with that. But Watkins Avenue Green Street is what it is now. It's going to stay that way. So we're not talking right now about Watkins Avenue or changing anything. What we're talking about is what green streets in the future and how they're going to look and where they're going to be. So I don't have a problem with this being called parks, because I don't think it's any different than if you take a Millard Park and somebody lives beside Millard Park and a green space. I think these can be more linear, open fields. I think a lot of times we need more fields and spaces for our kids to play on, just in open spaces. I think, we've done the issues in the areas right now. So we're moving into Partington Creek, where we'll be able to look at these in the development area. We have steeper slopes in development. We also have a higher level of townhousing versus single-family housing. So, the parking issues with townhousing in an area, as Councillor Hodge mentioned, how do we work that out? Can we work one of these around a townhousing development? How do we deal with that and those issues? And how do we deal with the grades in Partington Creek? Because we're not going to be creating these except for maybe a few small areas left in Smiling Creek. There's not many areas right now in Smiling Creek that you could, mostly built out, the road structure is already built out. So I think if people, when they know what it's going to be, if you're developing area and you call it a park, I think it's a public space. I think with the density we're going to be having in Partington Creek, we need that more open space for all the public around it for kids to play. That's why I say it's better just as an open field with some areas. And I think parking on the ends, I'm open to that, but even being less linear. Because I don't think we're going to take these out as in the future. I think there'll be more demand to keep them there in the future. So I think you can shape them less of a street than what it is today and create, I think, more flexibility in the design. I don't agree in giving the developers any breaks. I think there's a benefit and a cost, but I think they balance out between the two. I think parking at the ends is, because we do want to have it as a local neighborhood, community park, and I agree with Councillor Hodge. When I came on council, we had these small little pocket parks. Well, they're nice for sitting and resting, but they're not anything that kids can be active and move around in. So with the densities we have, we need these more open fields where kids can just get out and play, and people can mingle themselves. They can picnic, they can do things. So those are some of the issues that I see need to be done. I was going to mention what Councillor Reid mentioned about laneway addresses. I mean, it's done all over the place. I mean, I don't know why that's even an issue being brought up. But I think we can be more creative in Partington Creek, but I do think we need guidelines ourselves. I agree that this needs to be encouraged, not mandated. And I think we have to, as traffic operations said, we need to find that balance, because we do have a lot of complaints, just not in Watkins area, about parking, right? So I think we have to, I like the idea, because I was one of the persons that raised all the issues of parking, pushed for that extra pad of parking in there and the suites, the trade-off there to do this. So this has worked. I have friends that live on that street, and they absolutely love it. But at the same time, they treat it almost as their private park, right? And like any road, it's public space. So, and I agree with you and Mr. Alueva about that balance. But I think we also want to get it well used. So I'm quite interested in having this go forward on the work plan, so that council then can get your report back, make a decision. But I think over in Partington, I think there are options in certain areas where we can do some pretty unique things with it, whether it's a green park, commons area, or open space. How we phrase it isn't big, but I think it has to be realized that people that are moving in it, that it is public open space for everybody to use. Thank you.
Councillor Zero.
Could we go to the last slide, please? Thank you so much for this report, and what I'm going to speak about is just addressing the report. That's awesome. Just addressing the report, because I think that it's so fun. Like, this is such a fun idea, but there's just some additional pieces of information that I'd like to be able to understand to make the recommendation or for later. So I'm just going to go over them. The first one kind of plays to what we've already heard, which is, do residents want programming? I didn't necessarily see that in the questionnaire. Have we asked them, would you like structured programming? I would like to know if the residents that live on the street or around the street would like structured programming. I would like to have some information about the topography, like how does the topography affect this? Could we do this on a sloping street? Could we do this on a steep street? Or does it have to be only a flat street? I would like to see some actual MLS data about what was the price of the Green Street houses at the time, what did they sell for, and in comparison. Like, it would be great to have actual facts. Our wider community cares about how much things cost, and I think being able to have actual costs would be wonderful, as well as the maintenance. One of the other councillors already alluded to it. We can say that it's it's marginal or it's not much, but we need to know exactly how much it costs to maintain these streets so that if we do decide to scale them up, we understand how much it costs, and the wider taxpayers should understand that these are savings potentially. Maybe these are savings, we're not repaving. I'd like to know what are the extra costs to builders. There's been some resistance, it looks like, from the builder group that maybe they don't want them regulated, they want to have flexibility, and I want to understand what that's about. So if we can understand what are the extra costs, I mean, these sprinkler systems, that costs them more money. I'd just like to get a better idea of that. Also, would have liked to see how many have one car or less. You said 2 car or less. Would wonderful to know how many had 1 car or less, and can we benchmark that around the whole community? Is this the type of development that causes people to have less cars, or is there some correlation? I'd love to know that. The water fountain, I put here water fountain with the frog. I remember the first time I approached the frog, I was hoping there'd be spouts popping out of it. I think it would be so cool. That's why I would like to see what it costs, because I think it would be really cool to have a water feature there. So I wanted you to go to the last slide here, because I see bullet point 2 talks about what's the successes. Wider lanes, no secondary suites, additional on-site parking. None of those relate to the Green Street in general. They're about livability in the community. So I would just like to say those are things that we need on Burke Mountain, regardless of whether we have a Green Street or not. And also, at the beginning of the report, if we could have defined what success, because before we start a project, I think it would be great to define success is A, B, or C, so that when we come to the end of the project and have the report, we can say, yes, we met A, B, or C. And finally, don't be scared to make a recommendation. I see in the, and I know it's not easy because you got a rough council here, you got 8 different people, but in the conclusion area, I would just love to see your opinion, Michael. Like, you know, I know you're kind of saying if council wants to, I'd love to know what you think. Just put it right out there and go with it. So thank you so much.
Thank you. On your second last point, the second bullet actually refers to items there where we gave special consideration because of the challenges that were thought to occur when you only had access to the property from one end. Most of the rest of that development is a parking garage in the back, but street parking in the front. So that one element left us with some challenges. The lane had to be wider in the back by virtue of the neighborhood we were in, but also because all of the appliances and furniture would be delivered to the back door rather than to the front door. And notwithstanding the sprinklers, the fire truck is still going to go down the lane, and I don't know why we required sprinklers. But anyway.
So just in response to that, the wider lanes are still in need in Burke Mountain, whether it's a Green Street in the front or not, because there are some garages right around this area where people cannot get into their garage because they don't have a wide enough width. So my point is that we need wider lanes up there. The secondary suites are a problem because there's not off-site parking, and we need additional parking. Whether there's a Green Street in the front or not, there are issues.
Okay, sorry, I thought you were only dealing with the report. Okay. Fair enough. Wilson. Councilor Wilson.
Thanks. Just wanted to ask about the lights. Are there lights in the back lane in this on this lane? I drove down it before, but I can't remember.
No.
Did you heard any complaints from the residents about the lanes being dark and maybe feeling unsafe? Or
No, we did not hear any complaints. The wider lanes were preferred in this case by those residents, but we didn't have a complaint about the darkness in the lanes. It just never came up. And it was a staff recommendation to have pedestrian, like it was our own staff talking about having pedestrian lighting as opposed to street lighting on the Green Street.
So we'll talk about that one in a second. But I did some work on a development at Pitt Meadows. I used to be a carpenter, and the way they got around street lighting was every garage. This wasn't on a lane. This was on a small road. Every garage had 2 lights, and at night the lights automatically came on. And that was the way they didn't have to put street lights in. And I've driven along some of the lanes in Burke Mountain. I've always thought, you know, it might not be a bad idea to do that. Obviously, it costs the homeowner a little bit of electricity every year, but to me, it would just make a much safer, more welcoming environment, especially for the extra parking. You know, along the side of the garages, just might be a little bit brighter. The lights on the green part of it, they're regular street lights. How difficult would it be to replace them with pedestrian lights and use those somewhere else on Birch Mountain? Is that possible, or is that, they're not that old, can we put them somewhere else and put pedestrian lights on there, or is that just not worth it? Or I guess that's not our responsibility anymore, is it? That's the developer's responsibility.
The developer has nothing to do with it anymore. It's now a city street.
Okay.
I think the report is touching on a number of things. One is what worked on Watkins Avenue, and then we list out what's been working on Watkins Avenue, but what could happen on future green streets. So Watkins Avenue, as it's designed, it's been working for the residents. There's a lot of successes. The design has not been an issue. I think for future green streets, depending on the location and topography, there's options and considerations that could come into effect, such as pedestrian lighting or nonlinear format. And that's kind of what the considerations should be considered through the design and consultation with stakeholders in the future. The city does have one other situation where we did front a house on top in front, and I do have a picture that I didn't touch on, that was 1395 Marguerite Street, which is 5 row homes that front onto a city park.
Yep.
And it's these kind of considerations that we want to explore as part of the 2015 work plan.
That's what we're talking about.
Yeah.
And then I just want to touch on sort of the use of the park. I totally understand what Terry and May are saying in terms of people's privacy being sort of invaded and having the public come in and use that park. But I also think, so I don't think that would work to, if you changed it now for this park, yeah, it might be tough because people are used to it. But I think it's definitely worth considering adding some other amenities and opening it up in a new one, because people know that they're getting into that when they buy it, right? But to change this one, I see that. I also noticed that people wanted a playground, right? So for us to presume that a playground is bad in that area, well, people were asking for a playground. So I don't know how many people were asking for a playground. Do you have any rough idea of numbers?
We did poll, and it was a comment basis on who would want playgrounds or not want playgrounds. So it's not 100% unanimous. It was more like into the 50% range that would consider some type of programming. And then once you get into what type of programming, it even goes further decreased in terms of if it's a playground or if it was just removing the trellis feature. So it gets into even further detail that would need to be provided in the future through consultation.
So I guess I see both sides, but I think if you're starting something new, let people know what it is at the start, and they buy into it or they don't buy into it. And then I also agree with Brent in terms of trying to do this around townhouses, right? I'm very frustrated when I go to new townhouse developments and there's no place for kids to play. There's no area at all. It just seems we just cram as much in as we can, and obviously we want density, but I think we also want livability. And so if we can try to do some of this around the townhouse complexes, I think that would be a huge selling feature. I've talked to people in older townhouse complexes in some of the older parts of Coquitlam, and when a townhouse comes up for sale, it's snapped up right away because people want to live in an area where there's some green space and where there's some social areas. And I know you got to pay extra for it, but it seems in those areas people are willing to pay extra for it. So, thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Nicholson.
Thank you. So I'll reiterate Councillor Zerullo's comments about tracking the market. How did they compare to other similar homes at the time they were sold? How's resale held up? What's happened? And I think that's of considerable interest, and I think it's something we should have in our pocket when the next time we're talking about this kind of thing. And the developer or the landowner says, well, yeah, but we need some incentives, we need some concessions. We may very well be in a position to say, no, you don't actually, you should pay us a little more because we're offering you the ability to put something out that's highly marketable and will attract a premium price. I don't know, but we need to know before we're talking to people about it. My other point doesn't so much agree with Councillor Cirillo, and that's bullet 2 on the last slide, where we talked about no secondary suites. and that's just fine on this one. When we get to another one, I don't think that should be an absolute. Whenever we do a Green Street, we don't allow secondary suites because there are parking challenges. We have to try and deal with the parking challenges. And the availability of secondary suites goes a long way towards affordability. It also goes a long way towards sustainability and building density, compact communities, all that kind of thing. And maybe the next time we build a Green Street, there might be a bus at the end of the road. That would be really amazing.
What's that?
A bus? Yes. I'll take you to downtown Vancouver and show you one, May. Thank you.
Terry.
Yeah, just some quick addendums. I'm glad this slide is up because you can title this one Defense of the Rectangle. Because I heard a lot of talk, and I thought about it before, but curvilinear or irregular and things like that. And well, I think actually one of the attractions of these things is this very regular rectangular form that's actually, been around for more than 2,000 years. That public squares have been squares or rectangles, and for a good reason. They're actually somewhat more democratic because everybody's got an equal face, right? And somebody doesn't have, somebody's a little closer to the middle or too far back, if it's things like that. And so there's stuff that's been written about that. I won't get into that. But also in terms of a family area, I can be sitting at the northwest corner of this rectangle and see my children playing at the southwest corner without anything interrupting me. Or any, the sight lines right across in a park like this, that's an intimate neighborhood gathering spot, are very important, I think. And that's another thing that helps bind the community together, and that's a real attribute of a design like this, that everybody's equal, with equal face to the square or the rectangle, and also everybody can see the whole length of it. So if you get into more trees and more equipment and in irregular shapes, you're going to lose all of that. It also reminds me that you've got the top of page 9, inclusion of natural vegetation beyond grass. Okay, then you got 30% natural vegetation. That's 30% less place for the kids to gather, the families to have their gatherings, the Easter egg hunt to take place, whatever. Plus, it also blocks all those sightlines. So, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Is that the right expression to use here? If it ain't broke, don't fix it. I don't think this design is broken. So some of the areas you're going, I think, will fundamentally change the nature of what works here. Defense of the rectangle and the square.
I don't think it was the baby bathwater one. I think it was the second one. Okay. Do you feel suitably enlightened yet?
No,
Councillor Hodge.
So I just want to clarify, I agree with the Councillor Neal. I think that what makes this unique is that it is a front lawn, and it's a common front lawn. I would caution against over-programming it. I think the Easter egg hunt was 3 mums on the street who put that together, and it grew. So I think they will find their own program, whether it's Halloween, Easter, just a neighborhood barbecue, and get out and meet. They'll do their own price, and I think that's what makes this special. When I said, made the comparison to pocket parks, just to clarify, I'm referring to those 5,000, 10,000, a city lot. Nothing is in there right now other than a bench and some grass, and we have a couple of those in Burke Mountain. One of them is actually that one in front of Marguerite. If we can go back to the aerial one here, what I find is interesting here is the same thing. That's the corner here, and it's really just a very small part that we maintain. I live just down here. I never see anybody there. Because it's got roadway, it's what Councillor O'Neill said, it's roadway, it's out there, it's a public park, nobody uses it. So to not do that and instead do this, where it's enclosed in, I think it's a very different feel. We're maintaining both, but to me, that one has been more of a community benefit than what we did down in this corner. And some of us were on a tour up on Burke Mountain about 2 years ago. I know the mayor was there. And we walked to the end of the street. We went up to talk to a woman, and she had left her baby out in the middle of the square. She'd run up and take her infant down and put him on a blanket down in the front lawn and gone back into the house. And she felt that comfortable there that she would leave one and go away for 2 minutes to get the other. And I don't know that you'd feel that level of comfort in a public park. But clearly, the fact that it was enclosed, it was like their front yard, people use that space more, I think, than they do some of these others. So when I said it replaces pocket parks, I'm referring to just those passive green spaces. I think this is great. The term I like, it's density and livability, and I think it accomplishes a number of things. And I also agree that it doesn't have to be necessarily long. It can be square. One of my other favorite places on Burke Mountain is what we've seen now across from Victoria Park, where along, I think it's Wilkie, where we've done those row of townhomes. It looks almost like, it looks like something out of Europe, or the Georgian, those Georgian homes, and they all face around the park, and I think that's a really nice setting that we've created there. And the next time we go to do a park on Burke, maybe we think rows of homes around it. I mean, roadway, yes, but using that as green space and open space, that Notting Hill idea.
Common, yes.
The commonness of it.
Now,
Yep.
only
Thank
I
you.
could get the guy from Notting Hill to come over, it would be great.
Okay, no, there are lots of examples around that we can also look at in other jurisdictions. I've been to lots of them, not many of them on slope sites though, and that's one of the challenges. We talk about the slope site. If the parking of one of the houses has to be higher than the front door, which is on the Green Street, the front door would have to be facing the Green Street, and the parking can't be a story above it because it hasn't traditionally worked. Although I've seen townhouse projects where that was accomplished, but I can't imagine it on a single family. So I think there's lots of opportunities on the somewhat flat areas of the mountain, and there's lots of those. And I do want to see us encourage it, and perhaps even do some quid pro quo so that we see some more of these developed. I think they're a great amenity. Mayor Moore once used our Green Street in a slideshow of the great stuff about Port Coquitlam. That Port Coquitlam is pretty close to this Green Street. So,
move receipt. Oh, sorry.
No, actually, Jim wanted one thing.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship, and thank you, council members. Really very valuable feedback. We'll take that away. Just to note, there was a lot of consultation, discussion with the other departments, a lot of support from the other departments on how we can make this work. And particularly fire rescue out some of the addressing, the naming. I see the chief's here today, so that's good. We'll follow up on that. We will add this to our 2015 work program, and to provide some flexibility to address some of these concerns. But again, it's not going to be a cookie-cutter approach. I think there's development applications that are appropriate for some sort of green space, be it a commons or Green Street. You'll see it through that process, and we can fine-tune it then. Last thing I just want to mention, Councilor recall, we did provide some policy encouragement in the Parting Creek neighborhood plan, the Myersville neighborhood plan, and I would think now we want to do that also with the Coquitlam Lougheed neighborhood plan. Again, it holds out that opportunity for these sort of features in those areas. So, and lastly, on the leadership program, I think it's been a great opportunity for Michael. Knock something off our to-do list, and you'll see more of them at council.
Outstanding.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mike.
Motion is received. Second, all in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously.
Every area is different. Ours is different. We have to look at this.
Item 4 is a report regarding the Evergreen ALRT line update, fall 2014. We have introductory comments by the General Manager of Strategic Initiatives.
Your Worship, Council, just some introductory comments. This is a great news story. We have a little over 600 days left before opening. It's on schedule, on budget. A lot of work has been done since the last update report we gave you back in March. There's been a lot of work on staff's, on city staff's time in working with the provincial team. You'll see all of the details listed in the report of all of our vested interests that we've been trying to take care of, and it's a huge, huge project. It's probably one of the biggest that's come through Coquitlam. And what can I say? It's, you know, a $1.4 billion project, $1 million project, and it's just huge. And it's here, it's visible, it's not without its impacts on the city and businesses and that sort of thing. We are doing our absolute best to deal with the province. The province is doing a really good job in trying to deal with the contractor, but projects of this magnitude, no different than the Gateway Highway 1 project, Port Mann Bridge project, doesn't come without its share of challenges. And but there's been tremendous progress made, and we're getting there, and we're almost there. So I'd be more than happy to answer questions from the report. And any details I can provide, I will do so. If I can't, I will get the answers back to you. So I'm open, certainly open for questions.
I have a couple. One on page 3 where you're talking about the guideway accent lighting and that it's relatively expensive to implement and maintain, and that you're recommending a phased approach, except that we have Pine Tree Way, which will be a new report, but you want that for opening day. Well, I would like to see something in Coquitlam for opening day. And I don't know if it will be the full Monty or if it will be part, but Coquitlam is a big, big thing for us. And it's the guideway to the SFU students. That's where they're going to be catching the buses. And I think we're doing a lot here in the town center, but I think we have to recognize that Coquitlam is becoming mighty important on this route, and I would really like to see something on opening day there. So I'm not asking for extra funding. I'm just asking us to move it up.
Okay.
So I feel quite strongly about that. Are there any complaints from the, I haven't heard anybody talk about the tunneling. I mean, are people jiggling? Are they, anything happening? Are you getting anything from our
Through
neighbors?
your worship,
in
we have not received any complaints with respect to the tunnel boring or vibration or noise with respect to that. Doesn't mean that there haven't been complaints that have gone directly to the province. We're not aware of that. They haven't come through us. I think most of the people that are impacted may not be Coquitlam residences, but we've heard no complaints.
Yeah, I just find it curious that there hasn't been any, so that's okay. So for me, the big thing is to have something on opening day at Coquitlam. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Nicholson?
Thank you. Well, me started in on exactly what I was going to talk about.
Great minds think alike.
And I would go a little further. In the report, we say a lighting concept for opening day is being developed for Pine Tree Way. It will be the subject of a separate report to council in the near future. I'd like that report to deal with both. I'd like to be in a position, we are doing a lot of things on Pine Tree. It has the appearance of the most favored son.
So through your worship, you would like to see a more comprehensive report?
I'd like to see a comprehensive report that gives us the ability to either make a choice or to balance the two appropriately, but I would like to see Coquitlam well dealt with on opening day. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Asmussen.
Thank you very much. Weather issues affecting the progress on North Road with the roadworks. How far back? Because I know there was talk about paving Clark and Como Lake area, and how far back is that pushing the project right now?
Well, through your worship, every day that they don't do milling pushes it back by a day. So they have not had a good opportunity, a good break in the weather for the past couple weeks. I don't believe that means the project has been pushed back a couple weeks. There's a lot of segments to this project, and my understanding through the province is that if they're a few weeks behind on one portion of the work that consists of one segment of the work, that they're able to make that up through other portions of work and other segments to balance that off. So overall, they have factored in a bit of a contingency for weather and other things, and that's all factored in. So this delay in Coquitlam with respect to weather and not being able to pave, I understand has not set the project back with respect to the schedule.
Secondly, I know they're working quite steadily on all the curbing and roadworks from Clark all the way down. They're down now. concrete works and medium work is down around the Austin and North Road area and that stretch through there. When are we going to be able to get that in and done and have the lanes opened up for parking on the other side? Do we have a month, 2 months? When are we looking for those businesses? We're talking about those businesses at the Christmas rush having some on-street parking. Are we going to be able to meet that for those businesses there?
Through your worship, they are doing their best to meet that before Christmas, like December, but there's no guarantee of that. It depends on the weather. It's weather dependent. So
I would encourage them once again to work on that and liaise that one, because we, as a council, we had listened from the business down there and their concerns there, and we were trying to promise them that they wouldn't lose another Christmas with restricted parking and loss of business at their busiest time of year. So I'd like to see that dealt with and report back to us that there's going to be able to meet that target. And the same thing goes for opening up the left turn lanes. When do we start seeing those left turn lanes reopened up on North Road? Once again, the traffic is getting better. I drive the bus up, so it's not as bad as it was, and traffic's starting to flow better through there. But we still need some of the left turn lanes opened up as soon as they can. I would agree with my fellow councillors that have spoken that while we have a more limited scope of opportunities on North Road for works because it's in the median, it's not like on Pine Tree where we have a whole pathway, walkway adjacent to it so we can widen out, do pedestrian walkways, benches, the whole thing. So there's two different areas there. But I do think that we need to have that lighting installed at the opening there. I think we need to put in the full deal for Coquitlam along that line to soften the blow of that in, give it that safety and comfort in that area that they need for SEPTED, for crime analysis and making it safe. And I think we want to explain to the people that I think we need to get out to people better about the working that we're doing on the North Road corridor and the future through to Mr. McIntyre with our Coquitlam Lougheed neighborhood, the bike pedestrian connections that we're trying to negotiate and work through. I think we have to sort of highlight those issues as a connectivity piece along the North Road corridor. I don't think the public is fully aware of what we're trying to do, and I think as we get into that process, I think we have to highlight. And I think we have talked before about the Coquitlam area, about the opportunities for us to make better cycling connections on our property, TransLink's property, and moving and pedestrian connections. So I think we need to get that message out to the public in that area sooner than later about those connections. I think that's one of the issues that came up, and some meetings that we've had on developments in that area is about the future walkability, cycling, walking connections in that area, and in conjunction with the North Road beautification project through the province, and for ourselves, trying to make this a better looking area and a more, not like Lougheed Highway in through Burnaby, we want to soften that image as much as possible. So those are my comments so far. Thank you.
Councilor Wilson. Thanks. I read over the TDS again on the weekend in preparation of our application tonight, or of our items tonight, and one of the things it said in there, and I was trying to find the wording, but something like spectacular communities, or our goal in the Coquitlam area is a spectacular community, but that's not the word. Wow factor. But there was I'll find it anyways. But to me, that's what this accent lighting and all the improvements in this area are partially about, right? And so if we say in our TDS that that's our goal, but we're not going to do it, I think that's unfair to not only the people that live there now, but the people that are going to live there. So I agree. I think we need to treat it similarly to Pine Tree, although I voted against the Pine Tree one because I thought it was a little too extravagant. But I think we need to do something in North Road. I don't think we need the $300,000 light pole, so, but and the other thing was the lighting concept for opening day in Pine Tree Way. Is that different from what we have already kind of approved, or is that in addition to all the lighting that was part of the Pine Tree Way enhancements that we've already seen?
Through your worship, no, that should be the same as what's been.
So what we've seen is what this lighting concept will
Yes.
be coming back to us. Okay. I was worried that it was another whole
No.
concept and more costs. Okay. Thank you.
Councilor Cirillo.
Thank you very much. And just wanted to mention about I think you mentioned 600 plus days.
Yeah.
Safety. You know, we've heard a lot of stuff about just the movement of the bus stops along the way as we work through the 600 days, the pedestrian access, where to cross. You know, there's been quite a few issues with flooding and puddles and people getting sprayed and the blindness and the left turn and stuff like that. So if I could just put it out there that the community is very concerned about the safety along the way, and over the 600 days, if we could just do our best to keep on top of where the bus stops are changing to, what the pedestrian access looks like for people with mobility issues too. Can we still get by safely with some sort of devices? So that would just be my concern.
Okay.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Yep, I'll let council know as well. I know I emailed you all on the times when I was raising some issues related to primarily pedestrian safety, but also the traffic management, generally speaking, and the real shortcomings that occurred. I think mid-August was the beginning of it, and there was really a period of 3 weeks when they were trying to catch up and get back on top of the contractor. The contractor appeared to be making every effort to undertake shortcuts, and I know our staff spent a lot of hours managing that. I myself was on site a number of hours on weekends as well, and they came into my office, the project team, and for the province, and made some real commitments related to a number of aspects of it. From what I can see, they're living up to those commitments. The challenges were enormous, though, and I recognize that they've got a massive construction project that they're managing, and that they're managing without major incident, apart from a couple of guideway issues. We just don't want any incidents. We want this to finish safely, and there was a few days there when it didn't appear that the contractor was as motivated as we were to have it finished safely. We've got them back on track. I think it's going to be particularly important, I believe, in the next phase, as the guideway gets lifted down our main drag, which is much more complex, is particularly related to pedestrians than the North Road corridor, so I will have to stay on top of that as well. Anybody else?
Great places. That's the word you know.
Great places.
Great places, okay.
I'll move it.
Good points. Okay, second. All in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimous. Move adjournment.
Second.
Thank you.
Favor? Opposed? Carried unanimous.